Ambassador Barbara Lee, former Assistant Secretary of State, thank you for joining me on American Dialogues.
I'm delighted to be here.
So let's start with your last post in the Biden administration. Were you disappointed by the administration handling of the Gaza war and its reluctance to exert stronger pressure on Israel?
Look, in the course of my 35 plus years in diplomatic service, I will say candidly, I have never worked on something as complex, as ferociously complex, and as emotionally wrenching as the Gaza conflict. And I say that in reference to the suffering, of course, of both peoples, of Israelis who still today have not recovered from the shock of October 7th, and for whom the missing, whether dead or alive in Gaza remains, it's an open wound. And on the other hand, it is unbelievably painful to see every day the degree of the suffering of the 2 million plus Gazans and what they have gone through in this almost 2-year saga. So do I ask myself, could we have done better? Should we have done things differently? These are always the questions that haunt you. And I can say that the following. There were various points in the road when we had a series always of bad and less bad options. And those options now are fully Israel's. And the degree of difficulty that the Israeli public and the Israeli government is having in coming to terms with the situation in Gaza and where they go from here is beyond anything I've seen in this 2 years. This is a long answer to a question for which I don't have still the answers. At many points, I would have done X rather than Y or Z. But ultimately, this was a course that was set by the president himself, looking at, again, options that were never crystal clear, options that were rarely black and white, and the effort of moving things, moving policy, moving the events themselves in the middle of a conflict. There's nothing more difficult than that.
So in your time at the State Department, several senior officials resigned in protest over the Gaza war approach, saying enough is enough. Did you ever raise these concerns to Secretary Blinken?
I kept my conversations and my advice to him always private. Mm-hmm. I fully respected the opinions of a diverse array of my staff, both in Washington and out in the field, views that did not always align with my own, views that did not always align with where Washington was generally. What my responsibility was to give him and, of course, the White House my best advice, and I drew deeply on my folks in the field who were dealing with the effects and with the events themselves. So from my ambassadors, from their staff, and of course, I relied on the expertise within my staff in Washington. But I kept my advice to him private, and and that's where I'll leave it.
But you voiced concerns regarding the policy of the administration.
I gave him the fullest picture that I could, and I will say one of the things you discover as you rise in seniority, you get further and further away from events themselves, and it becomes more and more important, not less, to reach out and reach sometimes well below your own level to staff who are reporting staff who are in Amman or in Cairo, whatever. I went out constantly to the region and I talked to those officers at every level, including my own ambassadors. So I drew on this rich storehouse of experience and those who were touching the events and the effect of the events on public opinion in the Arab world, on the stance of those governments. I drew on all of that to convey to the secretary, who, of course, depended on that kind of insight. In the end, he too had to make his own judgment and take his own advice across to
Do you ever feel
the president.
Have you ever felt that your voice is heard?
Yes, very much, very much. That doesn't always mean that it changes the policy. And this is something that I think people do not understand unless they have served in government. Your responsibility, and this is again the way I conducted myself throughout my career, I had many fights along the way with senior officials on various topics. It's not as if Gaza was the first time it was a topic of great controversy and difficulty. I had those kind of fights every step of my career because I believed in speaking truth to power. That was my responsibility. Now, I always hoped that it would help move the needle, and sometimes it did shift the position of a senior policymaker. Not always, though. And so we have a long and storied tradition in the State Department. We have a dissent channel that is there for, that is the privilege of any member in the Foreign Service or Civil Service in the State Department to use to voice their countervailing opinion, their objections or what have you, to the highest levels of the service. But it's not the only way we make our voices heard. But that's not the same as you make your voice heard, it is appreciated, but that does not mean that it shifts the policy dramatically. That's something that is little understood or appreciated if you have not worked in government.
Fair enough. So one of the people in the fields, former U.S. diplomat Hala Ghorayt, who resigned after 18 years in service, she said, "We have
Yes.
lost all credibility on Gaza." She said, "I began to feel complicit." Do you agree with her? Did you ever feel the same?
These were Hala's own views, and I fully respect them, and I had the opportunity to speak with her before she left service. I deeply respect her point of view. And again, my own views I held internally as part of a privileged conversation with senior policymakers. And as I said earlier, we have many ways, and one very important institutional one, the dissent channel for people to make their views known. It is also understood when we come into the diplomatic service, it's not just understood, it is a commitment, one of the oaths that we take. One is to the Constitution, the other is to serve for the needs of the service worldwide, but also to uphold the policy. And if we cannot, then we can make the choice to step down if we feel that we cannot continue in that position. So I fully respect her position.
So what is the way forward in Gaza? Do you think this two-state solution is still viable?
To that question, I always counter with a counter question. What's the alternative? There are no good alternatives. Long ago, U.S. presidents and serially recognize the legitimacy of the national quest of the Palestinian people to have a state of their own. That state obviously has not been born. It rightly should be born of negotiations that have been tried repeatedly, have failed. But I, again, take the perspective, we have recognized it as a legitimate national right. I fully believe in that. And there is a need to return to negotiations. But I separate that for the moment from the urgency, the paramount urgency of, first of all, attending to the dire needs of the Palestinian people in Gaza. And along with that, finding an end to this conflict that will take them into what will assuredly be a long and difficult recovery road. And I don't mean just reconstruction of buildings. It's reconstruction of society in Gaza, which has been shattered. So that two-state solution, yes, I absolutely believe in it. But I think, unfortunately, in the overheated atmosphere that surrounds the Gaza conflict, there's a tendency to mix the two as if you've got to somehow find statehood immediately, as opposed to what is really urgent. People are dying. Every day, people are dying. And the food insecurity, the prospect of growing starvation is acute. So I put those right in a series of priorities. So there's nothing simple about ending the conflict, but there is also nothing all that different for this conflict as opposed to any other. You ultimately have to get parties around the table and come up with a political formula. I was listening to a couple of Israelis this morning on a podcast, and one said what I've been saying for months, well, actually going back to my time in service. Hamas should not be the party with which Israel and others are deliberating the post-conflict arrangements. That should be the Palestinian Authority, correct, however imperfect an organization that is. So the structure itself is an impediment, but it requires a political negotiation that brings hostages home, but also takes you beyond the conflict to say, what are those arrangements? And I think the Arab states, the Arab states, the five of them that have been most vested in finding a solution, have been very clear on this point. They want to see a role for the Palestinian Authority in post-conflict Gaza. And on that basis, they will help in all of the manifestations of what needs to be done.
So do you notice that there is a shift in the public opinion in the US?
There is.
Regarding Israel. Yeah. I'm sure you watched, for example, Tucker Carlson interview with Ted Cruz. And what does this reflect?
So look, I mean, it's not only particular personalities who are giving voice to this. You have, of course, members of Congress, including from the Republican Party, who are speaking out in a very blunt way. But as importantly, the polling is indicating shifts in public opinion, shifts towards, certainly towards support for a Palestinian state. But again, I take the two things as not unrelated. Gaza is Gaza, but statehood is not the issue. And I'm sure we'll talk about it in a moment, this question of whether recognizing a Palestinian state moves anything. And I've got pretty clear opinions on that. But as to your question, in both the right and on the left, you do have very decided shifts of opinion, but most importantly in the broader public. So the American public is not typically, and I'm generalizing here, typically does not track foreign policy issues minutely or in detail across an extended period of time. But this conflict is changing that, at least in terms of the Palestinian-Israel question.
So in December 2024, you were among the first Western diplomats to meet Syrian new leader Ahmed al-Shara. Before your trip, did you consult with former U.S. officials such as Robert Ford, who had met him in the past?
So I did not, but Secretary Blinken did. So what happened was I went out to the region at the beginning of December to attend the IISS security dialogue in Manama. And I had plans to meet up another senior official to go to Baghdad and to Amman. And of course, things began shifting quite dramatically. And we all woke up on that Sunday morning, the 8th, to the remarkable news that Bashar al-Assad had just fled in the night. And there was the imminent arrival of Ahmed al-Shara, or Abu Muhammad al-Jilani at the time, and his great group of armed forces to Damascus. So things changed rather rapidly. Long story short, I ended up staying out in the region for a bit over 2 weeks, as I did a series of consultations with the Jordanian government, with the Iraqi government, and then Secretary Blinken called us and said, I think I should come out. And I and Undersecretary John Bass said, absolutely. And in fact, we need to go to Turkey, and then we should get a group of our partners together and figure out collectively how we want to approach all of this. So in all of this time, at some point, Secretary Blinken talked to Robert. I've known Robert for years, and I have enormous respect for him and his insights on Syria. So we talked to, from that week in Jordan that I spent waiting for Washington to give me the green light to go into Damascus, which was both was as much a security issue as it was a political decision. We did a lot of outreach to Syrians that my colleagues had been talking to for years, to kind of understand the terrain, the political terrain, the security terrain.
How long did it take, until you received the green light to meet?
It was a couple of days in. So what happened, we had the Aqaba summit, our ministerial, on Saturday, the 14th, that Secretary Blinken, hosted by His Majesty King Abdullah, but it was the foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, who convened. We had all these ministers from the different Arab countries, from Turkey, from Iraq, and several of our European colleagues. And we had that meeting on the Saturday. The secretary went back that evening to Washington with the agreement that I would stay on and wait for over the next couple of days, prepare, etc., to go in. And it was just a couple of days of consideration. And a lot of it, as I say, was the question of security. Because we knew that there were, well, let me put it this way, there were a lot of foreign fighters, a lot of extremists who had been in the ranks of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The security structure had kind of melted away. It's very unclear what it would be like. And we had no opportunity. We have, of course, no embassy open yet. So our own diplomatic security was very concerned to get this right, so that I and Special Envoy Roger Carstens and two of my colleagues, we would be best, the arrangements were best made that we could avoid risk, or at least minimize risk.
So what are the main points that Secretary Blinken wanted you to deliver to Syria?
Well, first of all, so I had a long list of points, but one of the most important thing was really to get an understanding of what kind of person Ahmed al-Shara was, how he was thinking about governance, how he was thinking about counterterrorism cooperation, how he was he ready to, what was his general perspective on the neighborhood, on a whole host of things. And so it was both a set of messages I was charged to convey, but it was also, my job was also to really assess him as a leader. Not because we had a vote or not on whether he was going to be, as it turned out, interim president, but what kind of interim president he might be. So
what did you find about him?
Well, what I was first struck by was he had the demeanor already of a political leader, not just a military commander. That was very striking. And it was not just a question of him wearing a civilian suit. It was his thinking, the way he framed things, the degree to which it was clear he had been thinking about a whole host of issues, first and foremost, economic and security as the two principal challenges before him. He was thinking about the communities, the minority communities in Syria and their own fears. So he conveyed a sense of somebody very thoughtful, who had done a lot of preparation for this meeting and who spoke very openly about what he saw as these almost insurmountable challenges in front of him. And one of his principal messages back to me was he needed U.S. support in giving sanctions relief on an urgent basis. Because as he put it, the Assads had methodically wrecked the country, every sector, both through a combination of mismanagement, plundering, corruption, and of course the effects of the war. So he was very focused on the degree to which U.S. sanctions would keep getting the support. It was not, he didn't even talk in terms of support from others outside the Arab states, but rather how would you regenerate the economy with this superstructure of U.S. sanctions. Then on security, he made it very clear that unifying forces, armed forces across the country was number one or number two. So I think the economic and security issues were sort of co-equal in priority because either one of them could instantly undermine the very nascent stability in the country. And I think that's still the case. So the fact that with the strong encouragement and push from Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and President Erdogan, President Trump did, in fact, largely lift U.S. sanctions starting in May. But that's been a huge step forward for Syria. But he is still left with this issue of security and how it can be undermined by two things: the degree to which there are lots of forces not under his control, but also the degree to which inclusion or non-inclusiveness will affect people's willingness to, in fact, trust Damascus enough to turn over their weaponry or to fall under a national command.
Yeah. So Ashar wanted to meet you in the presidential palace, right? But you refused, or what happened?
No, this was something that our diplomatic security folks were organizing, and they were trying to just organize our day in a way that, again, minimized risk. So I wasn't really privy to that part of the discussion, and it was not a political choice. It was rather how they could package the movements of our group around town in the sort of again, least risky way. So it wasn't some big political discussion about not going to the presidency versus the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And that's often the case with diplomacy. It may look like there's a political message when, in fact, the tedious fact is you make a lot of these decisions based on the ease of movements around a town, especially a town that we didn't know at that point what it held.
So it
in terms of
in a
security.
hotel, I guess, or right?
Sorry, yes, we went to first a detention site where we had good reason to think one of our American citizens, Austin Tice, had been held possibly twice. That was facilitated by Ahmed Shada's government. And we also went to the Four Seasons and had a whole series of meetings. And I think it's still the case of the Four Seasons is kind of a Grand Central Station for a lot of people to do their meetings. That's probably changed at this point, but in those first weeks, that is literally where everyone did their meetings, or at least the foreigners did.
Yeah. So given Ahmed al-Shara connection to Robert Ford, also to a British NGO, that helped him and advised him
Yes.
politically.
Yes.
People allege that, the US indirectly helped his rise in Syria. Like, do you agree with that?
No,
Do you find it accurate or not?
no, no. It's not true.
It's not.
As you know, he had an earlier history with us of a very different kind when he went to Iraq, and we hosted him, shall I say, a couple of times in detention facilities. But in all seriousness, no, his rise was his rise. Now there's, of course, lots of speculation, informed or not, as to Turkey's role. But I can say, and that's for Turkey to answer, but I can say, no, we did not have anything to do with this rise. And a number of Americans over the course of time had indirect or direct contact with him, journalists, and others. But no, we did not materially help his rise. That was his doing.
Yeah. So Independentarabia just reported today that Donald Trump will sponsor a security agreement between Syria and Israel on September 25th. What do you expect to be the main feature of such an agreement if it happens?
So look, the effort that the Trump administration has underway, and it has resulted in now in this very public meeting in Paris between one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's closest advisors, well, several of them, and Syrian Foreign Minister Assad Shabani. What the Trump administration is driving towards is basically a sort of a deconfliction of disengagement. There are a couple of terms you could use, but essentially driving to a common understanding between the Israeli government and the Syrian government over the terms of the South in particular. And as you know, the Israelis they're focused on two things. One, they're focused on the border and whether threats could come across that border from the Golan. Mm-hmm. And this, of course, goes back to the sense of vulnerability they've had since October 7th of threats that come directly across their border. That's one piece of it. The other piece is the connectivity of their own Druze community with the Druze of southern Syria, Sweda. And the U.S. is interested in getting the two to a place where the Israelis will no longer intervene militarily. Mm-hmm. I don't know what all the details. Nobody does know all the details of what they'll come up with. But there have been channels all along, discrete channels between the Israelis and the Syrian government, but they haven't worked. And so the U.S. is moved in to help foster a kind of confidence on both sides that they can avoid risk of military or security incidents on either side. One of the messages that Ahmed Ashara was very clear about in that first discussion I had, and he has repeated this both privately and publicly, that the new Syria, he was determined that it no longer present or be host to threats to from Syrian soil to its neighbors, whether it's Israel, Turkey, Jordan, etc. So he's been very clear about that. He's reiterated that time and again, and he's been clear he means to include Israel. And as he said to me, so I will not allow groups to operate from Syrian soil to threaten Israel, be they Palestinian, Iranian, militias, Hezbollah, none of them. Those are great verbal commitments. I think what the administration is trying to do is make them clear and clean enough to give the Israelis confidence that the Israelis will pull back, will not intervene militarily. And again, there's a sort of duality of what the Israelis are doing. It's security threats, but also the situation with the Druze community in Sweden.
Mhm.
So I hope this succeeds. There's no reason it can't.
When you met Shara, did he also tell you that he would offer the Palestinian citizenship in terms
No, we did not discuss that. No,
that was not discussed.
no, we did not discuss that.
Are you optimistic that he can steer Syria toward stability?
Well, I try to avoid the duality of the O word or the P word. Am I optimistic? Am I pessimistic? Look, I remain convinced, as I was that day I met him, that this is a once in a generation, once in two generation opportunity for Syria really to move out of a long, dark, 5-decade long period and find its footing, find its full sovereignty, find agency for its people to really not just recover from that terrible war, not just recover from 5 decades of the Assads, but to really, for Syria really to be the country that it should be, with the richness, the wealth of its citizenry. I mean, the intellectual and human capital, and its geography and everything else. It's a keystone state. So if you think about an arch, the keystone is right at the top, and it holds everything together in that arch. Syria is a keystone for a much wider piece of the region for its security stability, not just for the neighbors. Can he do that? The hard, cold facts are that historically and globally, the chances of a successful transition for that first government, coming on the end of a long war, coming on the end of 5 decades like this, chances are very much stacked against you. Chances of failure are very high. So I could elaborate all day long all the reasons he may fail, but in the end, I think there are the ingredients for success. And one of those critical ingredients is that he has a lot of Arab partners who are very vested in Syria succeeding. They have all had their misgivings, anxiety, fear about HTS and about Ahmed al-Shara and his background coming to power. But they are operating on the principle that Syria's success is the region's success. Syria's failure will be devastating. He has got to learn how to govern in this period that he's an interim president. He's got to learn to govern more inclusively. That is the one thing that I think will undermine him faster than anything. And he's got a situation in the Northeast that is degenerating. And if we thought Soweto was terrible, Syria could see a replay of that kind of clashes that begin small and then become huge and disastrous if he does not really forthrightly engage, and again, not militarily engage politically.
So in 2022, you said the Lebanese would have to bear more pain before seeing reforms. Today, they have a new president, they have a prime minister, but disarming Hezbollah is still the main obstacle. And there are fears that this could spark a civil war. Do you share that concern?
It certainly could spark armed conflicts if it's not done with, again, the proper political engagement. We know why and how, Hezbollah developed as it did. And it thrived on not only the resistance mission that it took for itself, it also proffered itself as a sort of a counter government or a different government for the Shia in particular of Lebanon. It also thrived, frankly, on the venality and corruption of Lebanese political elites, not, without regard to sectarian background. So one of the most crucial pieces that has to be broken is this corruption and sort of like-mindedness of Lebanese political elites, which were very comfortable having no president, a very disempowered prime minister and cabinet, no central bank governor, and they were at risk of eventually having no chief of staff of the armed forces. They were very comfortable. They continued to make money and send their money to Europe. So yes, this piece of disarmament is crucial because you cannot continue. Lebanon will never recover as long as it has a state within a state, or a state that stands outside of a state, and that takes upon itself the right to bear arms and have its own foreign policy and respond to the direction of other countries. But the political piece of this is what Joseph Aoun and Nawaf Salam have got to do, which is get the engagement of this whole series of political leaders to support this effort and to do the outreach to the Shia community, and frankly, to get the speaker, Nabi Berri, to do his part in constructing a political understanding and support that will not be a head-on confrontation in the streets of Beirut with Hezbollah, but which will put political pressure on Hezbollah to cease and desist with its own armed mission.
Yeah, should it be
that will also require, of course, an understanding that again, I think the U.S. will be very instrumental in getting Israel to step back from the 5 points that it currently occupies in southern Lebanon.
Do you think the efforts now led by Tom Barak, Trump envoy, now also Morgan Ortega is back, do you think it's working?
In Lebanon, look, I think it's step by step. This is one of the big pieces that is looming. But again, it will have to be done with some political nimbleness that Lebanese leaders have to show. This can't be done by the foreigners. So I think Barak and his folks can push and pressure and help arrange conditions, but these are really important political tasks that the Lebanese themselves have to do.
So I want to conclude with this question regarding Israel and Iran.
And I think surely you have gone past 10 questions.
Yeah, so that's the final one.
Yes.
So do you fear the war between Iran and Israel could erupt again?
Yes. Yes. Why? Because the open question of Iran's intentions in terms of its nuclear program remains open. It's a question. The work has not been fully done to determine where all of that highly enriched uranium is and what the actual state of degradation of those three sites are that the U.S. hit. That can only really be done in a satisfactory way when the IAEA is able to get its people in and to those sites. And Iran is signaling it wants to resume cooperation, but it hasn't yet done so. So it's an open question, as well as will they attempt to simply covertly rebuild things? Israelis have made it clear that they are going to use all of their intelligence assets to watch this, and that they will be ready to intervene again if they see an attempt to move that uranium or an attempt to reconstitute both the nuclear program as well as the ballistic missile program, which was also severely damaged. So how does this end? It ends with a good, rigorously negotiated agreement. That is the only way we'll have satisfaction in the end, that there is robust monitoring that will give satisfaction to the US, Europe, Israel, etc., that we have put a permanent break on Iran's program. So those negotiations have not resumed. And so it is very possible. I can't really calibrate the likelihood or the timing of such a thing, because it really depends on what Iran does, what Israel thinks or it sees. But it remains certainly a possibility.
Safira and Ambassador Barbara Lee, former Assistant Secretary of State, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was really great to talk to you today.